Hello everyone, welcome to the next episode of Old and Word Books. Today we're going to be discussing this is the last book that I read, Doorway to the Dilemma, Bewildering Tales of Dark Fantasy, edited by Mike Ashley. Part of the British Library Tales of the Weird, which is it's my second British Library Tales of the Weird. If you've seen the review, you'll know that I've already read a British Library Tales of the Weird in the form of Algernon Blackwood's 4 novellas. Really nice additions, really nice series. It's the front cover there is, I believe it's for the story The New Mother, which is one of the better ones in the book. So I'll start off by saying that and I just remembered, hopefully the lighting's better as well. Something I was going to say. I'll start off by saying I definitely suggest reading this book. Most of the time I don't really say that until the end, but hopefully I'm starting to do a little bit more now. I definitely suggest reading this book. Welcome to the realm of dark fantasy, where the weird prevails and accounts of unanswerable dilemma find their home. Gathered within these pages are twisted yarns, encounters with logic-defying creatures, and nightmarish fables certain to perplex and beguile. So join us as we journey across the threshold, deep into the library's vaults, where 19 deliciously dark and totally dumbfounding stories await. These tales, plucked from long-lost literary magazines and anthologies, spring to life again to embody this most mesmerising of genres. So a lot of these range from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, or the mid 1900s. Hopefully you can see this frontispiece, if you can call it a frontispiece. So it gives you if you can see it, it gives you a fairly good indication of the contents of the book. It's a very varied book. So a lot of these, I'll say, just as a broad con, just to start off with, I'd say that they're a little bit too Victorian in their style. Of course, it is most of these are from the Victorian era, but I feel like I've sort of moved away from the Victorian style and the Victorian sort of the technical writing, I suppose, the overly verbose and highly technical and sometimes stilted language of the Victorian era. So I should say just looking at the contents page here, there's quite a good essay, a broad sort of overview of dark fantasy by Mike Ashley. What is dark fantasy? And it covers everything from it mentions Tolkien, Robert E. Howard, etc., etc., and it tries to give a broader or a concrete definition to horror and what horror is and how that differs from fantasy. It talks about Lord Dunsany, of course. It talks about Arthur Machen. I'll have something to say about Arthur Machen in a little bit, so stay tuned. And really, it talks about the house marching and all that sort of stuff, the fairy tales, Brothers Grimm, etc., Charles Perrault. And it just gives an overview for the book, the stories that are in this book. I'll say, in terms of the broad structure of my reading of this, I preferred the stories at the very start and the stories at the very end. The stories that I didn't enjoy were definitely gathered together in the middle. And I'm going to start off with a story that I really did not enjoy, not at all, unfortunately. And I'm not going to go too much into the stories. I'm going to try and give a broad synopsis without any spoilers. But for this first short story that I'm going to discuss, I'll give a brief overview of why I didn't enjoy it at all. The White People by Arthur Machen. This is included in this. It's actually one of the reasons I got this book. Arthur Machen's A White Story and Lord Dunsany's The Hoard of the Giblins, or Giblins. Two of the reasons why I got this book, really. Arthur Machen's White People, I went on a rant about this short story on Reddit and various other places, describing how utterly terrible this short story is. I'm sure somebody's read it that's going to watch this video, and they're going to probably just smash their screen out of rage for my ignorance, or whatever you want to call it. I've read a lot of fantasy books and a lot of the old style of books. I just did not click with Arthur Machen's The White People at all. Some people said that I had to read The Great God Pan to understand Arthur Machen's The White People. every time I just feel like every time I see his name now, I kind of get annoyed, to be honest. It's one of the worst. It might be the worst thing I've ever read. Just overly verbose, terrible start. Just with two intellectuals discussing concepts of fear or evil, and the plot is just nonsensical. There's no indication of what's happening. It's supposed to be I like ambiguity, but that short story is just, it made me angry reading it. Actually, it's the first time our story has ever really done that. The end, completely inexplicable ending, where there's names that had never been mentioned before, just popping up. Apparently I'm supposed to know alchemy to understand the story. Yeah, I'll probably leave it there, to be honest. It's Alfred Macken's The White People is probably one of my least favourite stories of all time. So I might read The Great God Pan at some point, but people will have to do a lot of convincing, I think. The stories I did enjoy, the first two are brilliant. What Was It by James O'Brien, written in, well actually the date isn't in, annoyingly the dates are in the back of the book, written in the 1800s. So I've got quite a simple story about invisibility. Apparently it's one of the first stories that featured invisibility as a sort of force or feature in the story, sort of fantastical element. Quite vital in terms of its prose. It's about these two men that that capture this invisible creature or thing, and they try to understand its form. It's really it's as simple as that. There's something to it though. In the end is, I'll say that it's very, very compassionate. There's a feeling of sort of melancholy once this thing is dealt with. So I'll say you'll see throughout this review that the stories are really quite varied. So that was like a brief overview of What Was It by James O'Brien. The second one is The Anticipator, which is actually a really, really good story by Morley Roberts, again written in the 1800s as well, I believe. It's a story about two writers, one of which is always writing a story ahead of the other writer, so the anticipator. And there's the conflict that grows out of that is really, really quite engaging actually. In the ending, I'll tell you what. I was going to talk about the ending, but the prose. This is a fairly obscure writer, Morley Roberts. I'm not sure most people have heard of him. The Anticipator. I found this short story to have some incredible language, where I actually said, this feels like it should be something well known. For example, so this dialogue, this writing here. I should not care so much if Burford did them well, but he does not know how to write a story. Look at this last thing of mine, of his. I saw it leaping and alive. It ran and sang, a very Maenad. It had red blood. With him it wasn't even born dead. It squeaks puppetry and leaks sawdust and moves like a lay figure and smells of most manifest manufacture. But I can't do it now. He spoiled it forever. It's the third time, curse him and my luck. I work when I must. There's something about that just really impressed me. It's very confident writing, like compared to The White People by Arthur Machen. I saw it leaping and alive. It ran and sang, a very Maenad. It's with him it wasn't even born dead. It squeaks puppetry and leaks sawdust. So we've got this one artist who's very passionate, and he's got this. You'll see he's got this ancestry and tradition behind him, and he writes with meaning. And the anticipator is just churning out this crap. Always ahead of him though. He steals his ideas basically. Really good story. One that I enjoyed, but not as much as the other two, was The Lady or the Tiger, which is it's very fable-like. It's one of those puzzle stories from the Victorian era, where there's a problem that needs to be solved or can't be solved. And then the very start really got me. This is my sort of style. So The Lady or the Tiger, and The Discourager of Hesitancy, which is its sequel by Frank R. Stockton. So I won't do any excerpts for this book just to save on time, but I really like the start. The first sentence is very much my style. In the very olden time, there lived a semi-barbaric king. It's a story about a king who has this interesting idea of justice, who solves every problem in his kingdom by giving a criminal the chance either to be eaten by a tiger or to be married to a bride. And I'll leave it at that. And they're usually faced with, so there's two stories, the original and the sequel. Both the characters in the stories are faced with problems they simply cannot surpass, I suppose. There's a really good scene where there's a character called the Discourager of Hesitancy, who wields a scimitar, and he tries to coerce the main characters into not being hesitant, trying to rush into their solving a problem. If that doesn't make any sense, you'll have to read the story. It's really quite good. It's got this sort of, I don't know, Middle Eastern type feel to it. It's quite good. So there are various stories in here that were decent enough reads, but didn't really catch me. For example, The Prism, which is just a story about, I suppose, lost childhood, about a woman who sees something strange through a prism, and she gets married, and she sort of loses that spark, I suppose. Decent enough story. Something I really quite enjoyed was The Mysterious Card by Cleveland Moffett. So The Mysterious Card is it's about this man who comes to, it's about this New Yorker, I think, who comes to Paris, and someone gives him a card, and every time and on this card is some French writing, and every time he tries to get people to translate this writing on the card, they leave him, or they run in disgust, or they tell him they can't be with him anymore, or his business partner cuts the deal, or whatever, however you want to say, leaves him alone. Everyone just leaves him, and that really fascinates me. That's a good way to grip you into a story. He just gets a mysterious card, no explanation, and everyone just tries to read it, and they say it will be better for you not to understand what is on this text, what is on this card. And so that's really what the first part is. And then the mysterious card unveiled is somewhat convoluted. There's a few stories in here in this short stories collection where there's a sort of ambiguous start, and then the sequel to it is kind of a convoluted way to describe everything that happened in the first part. So it's really, I've seen reviews for this, and a lot of people didn't really like it. The second part, I found it not too bad. Suffice it to say, there's some magic involved, and it gets a little bit convoluted. And the card is explained, and there's a sort of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing going on. Another story that I quite enjoyed, although it was a little bit too Victorian and domestic for me, really. It's just not really my sort of taste. Sort of New England, sort of Vermont, upper middle class ladies, I suppose. But the idea of the story is really quite gripping in a way. It's called The Little Room, and The Little Room sequel. It's about as you can imagine, it's about a little room, or perhaps it could be about a closet. Essentially, it's about this family they can't seem to figure out whether this room is a closet or it's a little room. And throughout the generations, they constantly go back and forth and trying to figure out. It constantly changes. It physically changes from a little room to a closet where they keep their china. And there's two strange aunts that may have something to do with it. That act very strangely, and they may have some. One old Aunt Hannah might have something to do with an old sea captain who might be magical. So, I guess I'm trying to illustrate that there's quite a good variety here. So that's a decent one. It's actually kind of fairly long though. It's one of the longer stories. It does have a sequel as well, of course. I'm skipping a few here. Some of them are just quite fairly small, 2 or 3 pages. One of the ones that I really enjoyed was Johnson Looked Back by Thomas Burke. Second person narration. I don't believe I've ever read a second person narration apart from like an adventure book. I'll just read the start. I'll read the start to give you an idea of this. Really quite gripping. It sort of sticks with you. Don't look behind you, Johnson. There's a man following you, but don't look behind. Go on just as you are going, down that brown foggy street where the lamps make diffuse and feeble splashes on the brown. Go straight on and don't look behind, or you might be sorry. You might see something that you'll wish you hadn't seen. He's a blind man, Johnson, but that makes little difference to him, and is of no use to you. You can't hear the tapping of a stick because he hasn't got a stick. He can't carry a stick. He hasn't any hands. But he's blind so long that he can walk the streets of this district without a stick. He can smell his way about, and he can feel traffic and other dangers through his skin. You can turn and twist as you like and use your mortal eyes as much as you like, but that man without eyes will be close on your trail. He's faster than you. He's not impeded by perception of the objects that reach you through the eyes. You are not used to the uncertain cloud of fog and blears of light. You have to pick your steps. Brilliant intro. The end, I want to spoil this ending. So I won't give any spoilers away really, but we eventually find out that this person that's following Johnson may be closer to Johnson than we think. Really, really direct language, quite gripping and engaging. Very active narrative. Another one that caught my eye, there's quite a few in here that I quite enjoyed actually, it got better by the end, definitely. The middle part is where the white people is in, and that's far too long. Lucy Clifford's The New Mother. So this story I wasn't really expecting to really enjoy it just based on the title. Surprisingly good. It's very fable-like. It reminds me a lot of George MacDonald, and George MacDonald is one of the authors I'm hoping to cover in the review later on. It's just that those are very symbolic and sort of difficult text sometimes, and I've not read them in quite a long time. So, but The New Mother is very much sort of MacDonald-esque, sort of children's sort of fable. Actually, this story was just remember this story is one of the influences for Coraline, Neil Gaiman's Coraline. And in this, the mother has the new mother has glass eyes and a wooden tail. It's not like Coraline though. It's about 2 sisters who meet a young woman in a forest, and they're always trying to get her to it's very surreal. I'm trying to describe it. They try to get her to show them a little man and a little woman in this wooden sort of compartment of her guitar. It sounds very strange, and it is actually quite strange. So I won't really go into the plot, but it's one of those Victorian moralistic sort of tales, and that can kind of put you off. That might put you off, I suppose. I know some people don't like those. So the next one I'll look at is The Hoard of the Giblins by Lord Dunsany. So it's good to see Dunsany in here. Obviously read The King of Everyone's Daughter, and there's a fairly large penguin collection in the Land of Time and Other Fantasies, I think. Really nice to see in here. Of course, a lot of these authors are fairly well, or not that well known, and Dunsany is quite well known. Nice to see a lot of names here. So I should say the introduction to each story gives a little blurb for each author, their history and their sort of writing style. So here we'll see George MacDonald, William Morris, Lord Dunsany, H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, Jack Vance. Almost all of those, all but one, I've read, so it's like very familiar and sort of like looking at old friends or meeting old friends. And Tolkien was there. I don't think I read Tolkien. So, The Hoard of the Giblins. Interestingly, it wasn't my favourite short story in the book. Very short. I kept laughing because this story is so Dunsany. There's a character called Alderic, which is one letter off Alveric from The King of Everyone's Daughter. And the very first sentence says, "The Giblins eat, as is well known, nothing less than man. Their evil towers join to terra cognita to the lands we know by a bridge. to the lands we know, to the fields we know. And this story is very much all about the imagery. It's not so much a character story, it's not so much a plot story or anything like that. It's all about the imagery. And Dunsany is the master of creating these little, such a short story. It's got maybe about 3 or 4 pages, and what he puts in here is quite incredible. So it's about the Giblins, who aren't actually described. I think it's meant to be left for you to imagine what they look like. So they live on an island, which is connected to a bridge. So I'll actually just read the excerpt. Actually describes it better. The Giblins eat, as is well known, nothing less good than man. Their evil tower is joined to terra cognita, to the lands we know, by a bridge. Their hoard is beyond reason. Avarice has no use for it. They have a separate cellar for emeralds and a separate cellar for sapphires. They have filled a hole with gold and dig it up when they need it. And the only use that is known for their ridiculous wealth is to attract to their larder a continual supply of food. In times of famine they have even been known to scatter rubies abroad, a little trail of them to some city of man, and sure enough their larders would soon be full again. Their tower stands on the other side of that river known to Homer as Horus Oceanoi. I believe that's the Oceanus, the encircling river, the river ocean, as he called it, which surrounds the world. And where the river is narrow and fordable, the tower was built by the Giblins' gluttonous sires, for they like to see burglars rowing easily to their steps. Some nourishment that common soil has not, the huge trees drained there with their colossal roots from both banks of the river. There the Giblins lived and discreditably fed. Alderic, Knight of the Order of the City and the Assault, hereditary guardian of the king's peace of mind, a man not unremembered among makers of myth, pondered so long upon the Giblins' hoard that by now he deemed it his. So essentially the story is about a man called Alderic, a knight called Alderic, who tries to take the hoard of Giblins by himself and for himself. And there's quite a sardonic edge to this story. Let's just say things don't go too well for Alderic. There's a sort of overarching, I don't know if you got that from the start, but there's a sort of overarching, it's almost like, it's almost playing on fantasy tropes in a way. The way it's written is definitely, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, I suppose. And yeah, it's quite decent imagery about this tower and these emeralds and sapphires and this bridge chained with golden chains to the land, to terra cognita. So the last short story, actually the very last in the book, The 3 Marked Pennies by Mary E. Kinselman, written in the 1900s. Apparently this author was called the Queen of Weird Tales, as in Weird Tales magazine. Really quite. Apparently she wrote about 30 stories, which were quite reputed in Weird Tales. And I really enjoyed this. It's very much, it reminds me of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Very much that sort of style. It's about, it's in this omniscient viewpoint about a man, or possibly a woman, it's not described, who's giving out flyers to describe something that's going to happen in the town, and that something is there are 3 marked pennies with a circle, a cross and a square etched into them, and those mean something. Either one of them means that they'll get $100,000, one of them means that they'll get a trip around the world, and one of them means that they'll get death. Really quite a good conceit. And that's the story. I won't spoil it anymore. And there's a really nice couple of sequences where they'll hoard the square penny, and eventually someone will get paranoid and throw it away and give it to someone else because it might be the death penny. Really good story. Really confidently written as well. So before I ramble on too long, already this video is far longer than I thought it was going to be. Definitely recommend The Doorway to the Dilemma. Some of the stories really weren't to my taste, but most of these, now that I reflect and look back on them, I definitely really quite enjoyed some of these. Really nice imagery and concepts in them. All except one story, The White People by Arthur Machen. Just my sort of, just my opinion really. Anyway, so that was Doorway to Dilemma, Bewildering Tales of Dark Fantasy, edited by Mike Ashley. See you next time.